9 in 10 employers use background checks for hiring. 4 out of 5 landlords use background checks to screen potential tenants, and 3 out of 5 colleges use background checks as a part of their application process. I would say that there's no such thing as a minor record when you have 1 in 3 Americans that are trying to get jobs, housing, and further their education, and that a record would serve as a barrier to them. This issue impacts a lot of people across the country.
That's the voice of Sheena Mead sharing about the Clean Slate initiative. They're working to automate and expand the expungement process in America for people who've long been crime-free. 1 in 3 Americans have some sort of criminal record, and Clean Slate's goal is to broaden their access to opportunity. That work simultaneously benefits communities and especially employers in a tight labor market. I'm Amanda Ellis, and you're listening to Inside America's Best Cities, a podcast for chamber, economic development, and talent attraction professionals on how your community can be a better place to live, work, and play. To learn more about this podcast, visit livabilitymedia.com. And with that, let's jump in. Sheena, thank you so much for joining us on Inside America's Best Cities today. We're really excited to have you.
Thank you, Amanda. I'm excited to be here and appreciate the invitation.
So, of course, our audience on Inside America's Best Cities is people who work for chambers, people in the economic development industry, people who work on thinking about how to attract and retain talent in communities. And I think you're going to have a ton of great things for them to be thinking about today. So, for some of our listeners who might not be familiar, can you start by sharing a little bit about the Clean Slate Initiative, which you, of course, lead, and what that means?
Yes, thanks. So the Clean Slate Initiative is a national organization. It is a bipartisan movement, ensuring that a record isn't a lifetime sentence. And how we do that is working with state and national partners and build coalitions that pass laws that automate and expand the expungement process so that people can have a shot at redemption, access to meaningful opportunities, access to employment and housing, and to provide for themselves and their families. The Clean Slate Initiative actually started out of Pennsylvania. Shout out to Sharon Diedrich in Pennsylvania, who started this work out of legal services and saw that Clean Slate was a economic and workforce issue. In 2018, 2019, they passed a law that so far has cleared over 36 million records just in Pennsylvania alone.
That's amazing. Can you talk about the impact of minor criminal records in the U.S. as it stands right now, just as kind of some background of why this is so important?
Yes, well, Amanda, that's a great question. And let me just say, there's no such thing as a minor record because just the smallest record, whether it's an arrest or a conviction, can actually create a barrier for people. And in America, there's 70 to 100 million people, 1 in 3 Americans, who actually have some type of legal record. And as we know, especially in the community, the audience that's listening, that like 9 in 10 employers use background checks for hiring. 4 out of 5 landlords use background checks to screen potential tenants, and 3 out of 5 colleges use background checks as a part of their application process. I would say that there's no such thing as a minor record when you have 1 in 3 Americans that are trying to get jobs, housing, and further their education, and that a record would serve as a barrier to them. This issue, like I said, impacts a lot of people across the country.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's a major obstacle, no matter what the exact issue or thing that happened was. That's a different way of framing it. And I guess I knew a lot of things involve background checks, but that really is absolutely everything that you would need to do to build life, to get through life. So this is typically something that would happen at the state level, right?
Yeah, typically at the state level, we focus on passing legislation, but we do have a federal bill, which we could talk about a little bit later. But most states, Amanda, already have a process to clear records after a certain amount of time. And just to give the audience a little bit of visibility of what that looks like, most states have a petition-based process where if you've been arrested or convicted of an offense, you're able to, after a certain amount of time, being crime-free, no new offenses, able to go petition to get your record cleared, expunged, or sealed. And that can be very cumbersome. And every state has their own process on what that looks like. Some states, you're only allowed to get one offense cleared. Some states, you may have to wait 15 years, 10 years. Some states, you have to pay $400 to $500 per case. And, just for people to understand, you can have an arrest that did not lead to a conviction. and maybe the case got dropped, but yet that still is on your record, and maybe you wanted to get cleared. And so, what Clean Slate does at the state level is the Clean Slate laws update and streamline that process. So, we use technology to automate it so that people don't have to petition and records are clear when they're eligible. So, this removes the barriers to people getting their second chance and takes that burden off the person. So once it's like your credit. I tell people to, like, so folks can understand clearly. They say after 7 years, or if you paid something off your credit, you expect it to come off. That is an easier way for me to explain to people who may not be familiar with record clearing process.
Yeah, that's a great comparison. Yeah, like it's not an active process you have to participate in. It's just like once a certain amount of time has passed, that's not something people can find out about you anymore.
Or they shouldn't serve as a barrier. Let me give you an example. I mean, like my own story, which I passed a bad check years ago as a single mom, and the check got returned. It was under $100. And because it got returned to the bank, they sent it to the local DA, district attorney's office. 2 months later, I had two cops showing up at my door and I got arrested in front of my children. And, this happened back in 2003. And years later, you're not thinking about a check that you might have passed or paid off
Yeah.
and that it'll pop back up. But guess what? Whether I go volunteer at my child's school, whether applying to higher education, that question is going to come up. Have I ever been arrested or convicted? And this is something that has to, could serve as a barrier where people just look at the application and then may throw it away or deny you based off of that premises.
Yeah. So in most states, unless they have already passed some type of clean slate legislation, there's no automated process for things to fall off your record unless you go through the steps you were talking about.
Unless, yes, most states don't have a clean slate automation law, other than the states that we've passed it in already. We've passed it in 7 states.
Yeah, so that was going to be my next question. Who are some states that you all have been able to work with that have made changes?
Well, it's been exciting, Amanda. To date, 7 states have passed laws that meet clean slate criteria for record clearance. Pennsylvania, as I spoke about earlier, passed a law in 2018 that so far has cleared over 36 million records, and at least over 1.5 million people have been impacted. Utah came second in 2019. In 2020, Michigan has passed a law, then Connecticut, Delaware, and then this year alone, Oklahoma and Colorado passed a law.
So that's a little bit of every region of the country, too.
Every region, and there's many more states that we're working in now that are working on legislation and working with partners to pass clean slate laws. And there's been a lot of momentum and a lot of states trying to figure out how they could automate the process and remove that barrier, because people want to get back to work and they're realizing that this is a barrier for folks getting into the workforce, and employers are recognizing that as well.
Exactly. And to talk a little bit more about that, so you've talked a bit already about barriers to employment and background checking, and you just brought up workforce again. Could you expound on that a little bit more in terms of how clean state legislation can impact the overall workforce? And of course, in a time right now where things are especially snug.
Yes, I appreciate you bringing this up, because I think folks don't realize all the barriers that comes with not being able to have maybe a clean slate. There are certain positions that may call for you to have a certain license, and as simple as just being a barber. We've seen people who have actually been formerly incarcerated. While they was incarcerated for amount of time, they may have taken up the skill or trade of barbering while they was incarcerated, and that was a job that they may have done inside a prison. Or cosmetology. I met some women in Oklahoma that learned how to be a cosmetologist and came home to start a business because they knew that they would have the barrier of trying to get a job because of their record. And
Hmm.
what we found out, in many states, there are restrictions that you cannot even get a barber or cosmetology license easily because of a record,
Hmm.
or even to wash hair. I think I heard in Oklahoma to even get a license to wash hair. And so there are partners across the state that are working to change those laws. But these are some of the restrictions that we see. So there are 44,000 legal or regulatory restrictions that limit access to employment, occupational licensing, housing, and other opportunities. When I say regulatory restrictions, meaning when we talk about access to employment, that could be a license to barber, a license to nurse, to be a CNA. It could be to get your trucking license. It could be to get endorsements on your license, to being able to drive a truck. There's so many different legal and regulatory restrictions. And a lot of these laws are very dated and
Yes.
old laws that we're approaching. And so some of these things come up as we're passing clean slate laws in states. We start hearing the stories around these other restrictions and regulatory restrictions, and we try to address those as well with our partners.
Yes. So, thinking about our listeners, again, people in the chamber, economic development, talent attraction space, how can people in those fields support this kind of work? Thinking about the unique access they tend to have to a lot of different people in the community, business leaders, political leaders, all of the above. How can they support this?
Well, I think there are many ways that folks can support. I think, this is a big step, just being able to be on this podcast to talk about it and to talk to the business community around the issue because we have a large pool of undertapped, underutilized workforce that
Mm-hmm.
is ready to go back to work that can be tapped into and that have the skill set and are able to be retained and great employees. But because of these barriers that I think sometimes employers don't know that is in between them and the employee that is there. And so businesses and organizations like the Chamber of Commerce are vital partners in Clean Slate efforts. They've been a big partner in Utah and Colorado. And if listeners are in states with a Clean Slate coalition, they can join and help pass Clean Slate policies. I recommend them reach out to the Responsible Business Initiative for Justice, rbij.org. They've been a great partner that's been working with employers around second chance hiring and fair chance hiring. And I encourage them to just, the coalition, be a part of the conversation and really talk about, why it's important to be able to bring people back into the workforce.
Yeah. What are some states with the coalition that you mentioned?
So we have Colorado is probably one of the states that have the most robust business coalition happening in Colorado. Right now, there's coalitions in Texas, Michigan, Delaware. In Delaware, we saw JP Morgan was really heavily involved. And so there are multiple states that folks are engaged with. But if there is an absence of business community, this is where your listeners could join in. They could tap in. And maybe there are businesses that are already aligned in values and already hiring people who may have a record or say that, hey, we're a second chance employer. And we believe that people should have a fair chance at redemption and being able to be a part of the workforce. Just having that voice around advocacy as they're advocating with the legislators on other issues and just being a voice in the community goes a long way for this movement.
Yeah, it's so important. And, a lot of chambers do play a big role in policy and advocacy and advocating for policy that's going to support their business community. This falls squarely into that category. So it's great to hear some ways they can engage there.
Yeah, and they're like you said, they're people from the community. So a lot of the chambers also have a lot of the small, or not even small, but the mom and pop companies that are part of the chamber, and they're the people that are employing the people right from their communities, from their churches, from their neighborhoods. And a lot of these people, when you think about it, when 1 in 3 people in this country has some type of record, we're talking about our neighbors, our friends, and our families, right? And so they want the same things that everybody else wants: a safe place to live, a fair chance at making their lives better, and meaningful opportunities to provide for themselves and their families. And the business community could help with that.
Yeah, so everything that you've said has made so much sense to me. Do you get pushback on this? And if so, like, what does that look like? Is there any pushback our listeners might face with advocating for this? What are some misconceptions around this work you could maybe dispel?
Well, I think the first misconception is like us and them. And it's not. It goes back to what I just said. We're talking about 1 in 3 people.
Hmm.
There's 2 of us on this line right now. I'm one person. I'm a person who's directly impacted. And these are people in our neighborhoods. These are our children's parents. These are, people in our congregations and our faith communities. And I think the misconception is that people who have a record are folks who have maybe some of the most like harder offenses that may come to mind. But these are people who have got offenses for, I just gave the story myself, bad check, driving on suspended license, things that some of us get caught up in every day. And sometimes it's people who just has the money and means to not have a record. And
Hmm.
that's why they don't have it. But so I think the misconception is that people don't believe that everybody deserves a second chance. We all want to be forgiven. We all want a shot at redemption. And we want to extend that to our family and friends and people that sit next to us that at work and within our circles. And I think people want that for our community as well. And so we have not seen a lot of pushback, I would say, from community and folks. Sometimes where the pushback may come back is where people think that it may be a strain on the courts to automate or to government agencies. But actually, what it does, it reduces strain on the court system. It saves taxpayers money, and it opens doors for millions of hardworking people seeking jobs. We've seen this actually in the pandemic. I started 2 years ago in a pandemic, and we thought maybe this was actually probably something that was impossible to do to move this legislation. But we saw the need because of the courts being shut down, because we saw that the workforce was low. It was a great opportunity saying, look, we're able to continue to be able to automate the process, get people back to work, give people a second chance at making their lives better. And so I think now folks are really picking up on that momentum.
Yeah, and you already talked about this a little bit, but in your states that have already passed this legislation, I mean, what are some positive results that they've seen? I know you already threw out some numbers of just the sheer number of people that were able to probably make some big steps forward in life as a result, but anything else you can speak to there?
Yeah, so just going back in Pennsylvania, since 2018, over 40 million cases have automatically been sealed. Over 1.2 million people have a record sealed. 1.2 million people, that's a lot of people. In Utah, the law went into effect earlier this year, and cases are being expunged on a rolling basis. Nearly 500,000 people from Utah have been identified for automatic record clearance so far. Since we've started working in 2019, 2 million people are on a pathway to receive full record clearance, 2.3 million people to have at least one conviction or non-conviction cleared, and we're on a pathway to 7.3 million convictions, non-conviction cases to be cleared. And that's a lot of people that
Yeah.
impacts. And it's just not about them, Amanda. It's about their families and their children and their communities, how that's going to have an impact on the full community.
Yes, huge positive impact on the workforce too, and especially timing wise with COVID and coming out of COVID, it's definitely something that is needed. You threw out the phrasing sealed a couple of times. What exactly does that mean?
Yeah, so sealed and cleared, and I'm not a lawyer, Amanda, and so I would say that these terms could be used differently depending where you're at and who's using it. And
Hmm.
so that's why I like to just say record clearance.
Gotcha.
So sealed means where maybe employers may not have access to see that you have an arrest on your record or a conviction. But that does not mean that law enforcement does not have access to it. It's still for more of the public and like the folks who may run background checks, far as like employers, schools, and having a record sealed. And then when you think about expungement, that's kind of like throwing it away, right? It's thrown away. No one can see it.
Yes, that makes sense. So, a little bit more granular question that I was wondering about. So, since this doesn't apply in all states, how would this work with people like moving around from state to state just out of curiosity? So, like, does it depend on what state the incident happened in or where you're living? Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and that's something we're always trying to chip away at and trying to figure out how we could better serve our community and the work that we're supporting.
Hmm.
Because the first thing, let me go back, Amanda, what we're trying to address is being able to automate the record clearance process by using technology. And as you know, every state is not up on technology. It's funny, one of my coworkers say some of these states are still chiseling records and files on a tablet in their back rooms. And so, of
Yeah.
course, you could be in Pennsylvania and maybe something's cleared, and I don't know, maybe you may have a fence in another state that the data is not up to date or they're not talking to across states. And so that gets into more of the policy pieces around interstate stuff and data sharing. And so we're still trying to identify how that works and doing some research around it, but really it's state by state. We're focusing state by state how we're able to at least help bring some relief in the state where the person is, where they live at.
Hmm. So, do you feel like it would be accurate to say that if a state does not have clean slate legislation in place, if they were able to establish that, they would pretty much automatically increase their workforce and worker pool pretty hugely just by doing that?
I would say yes. So let me tell you, they did some research in Michigan, and 1 year after record clearance, the research showed that 11% more likely to be employed and earn 22% higher wages. And I think it will increase the record pool. I mean, just off the stigma that it just takes off a person and the confidence to be able to say, I'm able to go and even apply for a job. Don't have to worry about the rejection
Yeah.
based off my record and not the skill set that I know I have. That increased the likelihood of people just even applying, when they don't feel like there's already a barrier set up for them. And
Yeah.
so, yes, I believe it will help the workforce and engage folks.
Yeah, and that's a great point that we really haven't hit on. Like from a personal standpoint, it's
Yeah,
embarrassing.
it's a stigma. Like people walking around like you're already, I've got over that thing, right?
Yeah. Or you didn't really do anything wrong in the bigger picture of things, And yeah, it's embarrassing. It's not something anyone would want other people to know, especially like from an employment standpoint. Like even if you still got the job, it's just
Yeah, it's like reliving it.
you feel like you're not starting with a clean slate, hence your name.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely. I could give you my own example. When I went to apply to go to college to start finishing my degree, and this is probably 8 years after the whole check thing, maybe even more than 8 years past the check thing.
Hmm.
And when I was doing the application, because I didn't lie, I said, "Have you ever been arrested?" I'm like, "Well, I'm young. Most folks, some 1 out of 3 people don't have some type of experience." And so I checked the box, but then it was like, okay, now that you've checked the box, tell me what happened. Where's the deposition? You need to pull the records. And it's like, why am I reliving this? This is something that got dropped or dismissed, or I've already taken care of it. And so it is. It's like a stigma. It's like, where's this coming from? And why do I have to go back before? It's like I'm going back before a judge or like, a bench to like reprove that I'm worthy of coming to the school.
Yeah, and having to prove that over and over, you would
Yeah.
feel like having to prove you're worthy over and over for different things in a way that other people aren't having to do.
Yeah, I mean, even the stigma when I was going to volunteer at my son's school to go on a SeaWorld trip. And, I understand they need to put policies in place to ensure that the children are safe, and I'm all in agreement with that. But also looking at how the process is, though, when I went to the website to go sign up to be a volunteer, it asks you a question, and you're talking to a computer. You're not talking to a person where you're able to like explain and give context, but it's just like clicking a button, which automatically with technology is probably going to reject. And it's like, yes, it was a check, but this has nothing to do with me volunteering. And at that one time, I kind of just retracted from even volunteering because I didn't want to bring stigma to my child. I didn't know what rabbit hole this was going to take me down. And so I just kind of stepped back from that engagement.
Yeah, and companies looking for workers or organizations looking for engagement from people, like they can't afford to have people feeling like if they have to check, yes on a box that their application is going to get thrown out immediate. I
Right.
mean, we need engagement from people and companies need employees and it's defeating the purpose. So you talked a little bit earlier, Sheena, about your personal connection to this work. Do you want to share anything else about that and kind of what brought you here? From reading up on your background a little bit before this call, it looks like you have helped a lot of people in a lot of different ways over the course of your career. But can you elaborate on that a bit? What brought you here?
Yeah. So what brought me into the Clean Slate Initiative is I had worked on a campaign in Florida that worked on restoring voting rights for people with felony convictions because prior to passing the ballot initiative in Florida, you were banned for life from voting if you had a felony conviction. And just so your audience understands, like, felony is a word that seems very heavy and is used in so many different ways in media and terms and culture. But you could get a felony for driving on a suspended license in Florida. You could get a felony for catching a lobster that is not the right size and keeping it, or even a fish, wildlife. There's so many crazy
It's
wildlife laws.
ridiculous. Yeah.
And a lot of these laws came really from the Jim Crow era and it stayed. And like Florida was like one of 3 states in the country that banned you for life. So can you imagine driving on suspended license because you didn't have the money to get your license renewed and you had to still go to work and you got a felony offense and now you can never vote again, ever, unless you petition to go before the clemency court. And so I worked on that initiative with Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. And one thing about that campaign, it wasn't about politics or partisan politics. It was about people and redemption and being able to just have a second chance and be able to have your voice heard. And that campaign was ran with so much support from people from all walks of life, economic status, political backgrounds, and I was able to see what is possible and what hope looked like, and wanted to bring that into this work. So when this opportunity came up for Clean Slate, I thought about this as the next level of what I was able to see happen. And so I was really excited about coming to Clean Slate Initiative because I know how to put people above politics, and that's what we have to do to really pass these laws, a fair chance of making people's lives better.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I feel like the work you're doing is so important in helping so many people across the country.
I think what I would add is that, this is an economic and workforce issue, and it intersects with many things that we all care about. Intersects with health, childcare, school, education, racial justice. The biggest thing is it is an economic workforce issue. People, workforce is saying that, they need more employees and more workforce. I think about just going through the airport and I saw that a local chain was shut down because they had a shortage. And going to a local business store and I was trying to get business cards printed in another state and they couldn't open the store because there was enough workers. And just to say to the audience that there are people who are ready to go to work, who have the skill set that's an untapped workforce base that's out there, but there are barriers that are keeping them from coming to your place of work to be that great employee that you need. And some of these things are things that they could just lift their voice up and just utilize their platform as a business, because business has so much power in our communities and also within our state legislators. I believe that this is a space that is safe enough for them to say that we believe in second chances and we believe that people should be able to go to work. And so just be able to increase the awareness and support from business.
Yes. Well, Sheena, that is a perfect note to take us toward wrapping up here. I do always end our interviews on the podcast with a fun question. So, since we are, of course, inside America's best cities, where are you based? I know Florida, but what city?
So I live in Windermere, which most folks probably don't know where Windermere is. So I would say Orlando. So I'm doing this podcast from Orlando, Florida.
Okay, so this is interesting because Orlando is a more touristy city than a lot of places I get to ask this about. But the wrap-up question is always, what's one bucket list item that visitors to your city should be sure to do? So I'd love to hear like a creative take on that because, obviously when everyone thinks of Orlando, we think of, Disney World and SeaWorld and
Yes.
all of that good stuff.
Gosh, there's so much to offer, Amanda, here in Orlando, and I'm still trying to find time that I could be a tourist in my own city.
I know it's so easy to forget to do that.
Yeah, I get jealous when folks come here and they're like, I'm going to this thing. I'm like, I didn't know this thing
I want to go
existed
that. I
here.
want to go there.
I want to go
Yeah.
there. So I would say something that's fun. Everyone goes to the big theme parks, and that it could be so exhausting and hot.
Yeah. And expensive.
And expensive, and you need energy. And with kids, it could be disastrous for adults. I'm telling you. So
Yeah.
it is a long day. So I would tell you one thing that is really fun. There's many things, but I'll give you one. So in Orlando, in City Walk, and I cannot think of the name right now, but they have this live karaoke in City Walk where you have a live band that backs you up during karaoke. And it's probably the most fun, inexpensive, fun thing you do. It's free to walk down City Walk, free to go to the spot, get on stage, and be a star.
What a blast. Okay, so they play the music for you instead of you picking like a track?
Well, they play the music for you and you have a band. Okay, it's Rising Star.
Okay.
Rising Star on City Walk is a karaoke club. You talk, you get backup singers and a band.
Oh my gosh, that is hilarious. Do you have a go-to karaoke song? Like, are you one to get on stage and do it or more watching?
Depends on if spirits are involved or not. We're
I hear
protecting
you on
stuff.
that.
I would say I'm more on the of rapping because I know I can't hold a tune all the time or I get too excited. So I would do a song, maybe like Biggie Smalls. I'll do that with my
Okay.
husband. So yeah,
That's
Notorious
hilarious.
B.I.G.
Well, Sheena, thank you so much. That was such valuable info that you gave our listeners. Really fun wrap up. You definitely pulled something else out about the Orlando area that I did not know. So thank you so much for taking some time.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure being here. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Livability Podcast, where we take you inside America's best cities. At Livability, we highlight the unsung awesomeness of small and mid-sized cities across the country. We also partner with communities to reach their target companies and potential residents through digital content and print magazine programs. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow, rate, and review this show wherever you listen to podcasts. You can learn more about us at livabilitymedia.com. Have an idea for an upcoming episode? Email me at aellis@livability.com. Until next time, from Livability, I'm Amanda Ellis, sharing the stories of America's most promising places.